out of the two main responsibilities, the political responsibility to seek a solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict and also look after the welfare of the Tibetans in exile. These are the two prime responsibilities of the Kashag under the Central Tibetan administration. So with regards to the first one, that is resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict through middle way policy, the first focus of the 16th cabinet is reopening Sino-Tibet dialogue. Now, if we have to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict through peaceful means, then we have to realize that negotiation is the only way to go forward. And negotiation with whom? Negotiation with the Chinese government. And that is inescapable. That is why the first step, as soon as the 16th cabinet came in, was to restructure the committee that concerns the Sino-Tibet dialogue. So earlier it used to be a 17-member committee which used to meet, from time to time in a year. We transformed that into a permanent strategy committee. The reason why we put permanent is because we have the 4 secretaries who meet regularly, who are permanently employed in the Central Tibetan administration. And these people are also responsible for different sections of the information management system. Therefore, the security secretary responsible for information gathering is one of the members. The director of Tibet Policy Institute responsible for analyzing this information is also one of the members. The secretary of the Department of Information and International Relations responsible for dissemination of this information is the 3rd member. And the political secretary of the cabinet secretariat. So over and above these 4 members, we have 3 advisors, 1 special invitee from the private office, and during the last meeting, we have also included the Minister for Information, International Relations and Security also in the Permanent Strategy Committee. So all these meetings are chaired by the Sikyong, since this is the most important responsibility of the Kashag. So we will make every effort to reach out to the Chinese government as much as possible, but it will largely depend on how the Chinese government responds to our overtures. Therefore, despite the historical factors, we will have to have a positive mind to believe that things will resolve. And as Buddhists, we believe in impermanence of things. So things will have to change in China. Therefore, we always have a very positive outlook, and I always make sure that to inform our people and supporters never to lose hope. And this is something which His Holiness has always imbibed in us, never ever to lose hope. So we shall never lose hope, and we will continue to explore possibilities for dialogue with China. But I don't want to talk more about this because as it stands, divulging certain details of what is going on or what is not going on may impact or harm the ongoing processes. So you will get to know as and when things happen. We have to reach out, as I mentioned, to the Chinese leadership. These are the true facts of life when it concerns Tibet. If we have to find a solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict through peaceful means, then there is no other way than by talking with the Chinese leadership. Until such a time, then we have to reach out to the international community. There is no other choice. But there also, what we have to realize is that no nation will leave aside their national interest for the interest of Tibet. So if we understand these two realities, and this can happen if and only if the national interest of a particular country aligns with the national interest of Tibet, then they can be a force that can be combined together in our struggle for freedom. Now we have tried to adopt a strategy that is a little bit different from the earlier administrations. in the sense that we have decided to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state to create the right value for the middle way approach. Even though we stick by the middle way policy, we have changed our strategy to focus on the historical status of Tibet. Usually I say we have 4 reasons for doing this. One is, of course, we have to send a message to China. Unfortunately, the Western world, or much of the rest of the world, depend on China's history for Eastern history, which is mostly fabricated. And China's propaganda, historical propaganda around the world have been so pervasive that many people might be thinking that Tibet must have been part of PRC for very long, or part of China since time immemorial, as Chinese government wants them to say. So therefore, it's very important that we send this message to the Chinese government that Tibet historically was an independent state. Whenever talks about dialogue happens, the Chinese government puts this precondition on His Holiness Dalai Lama that His Holiness should say that Tibet was part of China since time immemorial or since antiquity. But His Holiness always had a very smart answer for that, and His Holiness had said that I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians, because it has to be based on facts. History cannot be changed based on the whims and fancies of individuals and governments. It has to be based on facts. So what matters is the welfare or the future of the Tibetan people. So based on that position, and also, of course, there are a lot of historical books by Tibetans. But these days, when we travel around the world, we are not taking Tibetan historical books that could be construed or maybe considered as propaganda by others. Therefore, these days we take these 2 books, one by Michael van Walt van Praag and his partner Meek Baltius, called Tibettv 2020. So his approach, Michael's approach, was to study the history of Tibet from a multi-angle, dealing with some 70-80 scholars from many countries in Inner Asia over 7-8 years. And he has come out with this book called Tibettv 2020. Now, in his book, what he tries to establish is whether it's Tibet's relationship with the Mongols. For Chinese, the Mongol rule over China is only that period between 1271 and 1368, when Kublai Khan invaded China and ruled China from China for about 100 years. But the Mongols existed even before that and even after that. So whether it's Tibet-Mongol relationship or the Tibet-Ming relationship between 1368 to 1644, when China was ruled by the Chinese themselves, the Han Chinese, we had 3 rulers in Tibet, the Pamadrupa for about 100 years, Rinpoche for about 100 years, and Devasangpa for about 100 years, till 1642. Then the Mings were overthrown by the Qings, who are the Manchus. They are also not considered Chinese by Han Chinese. So the Manchus ruled China from 1644 to 1911. But Tibet was ruled by the 5th Dalai Lama from 1642, 2 years before the Qings overthrew the Mings in China. So what Michael tries to prove through this book is that whether it's Tibet-Mongol relationship of definition of state-nation at that time, or relations between neighbors, or whether it's Tibet-Ming relationship or Tibet-Qing relationship, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. Now, there is another scholar called Professor Lau Han Tin. He once told me that he has always been intrigued by this position of the Chinese government that keeps saying that Tibet is part of PRC. So he wondered as to why the government has to keep repeating this statement. If Tibet is already a part of China, then why does Chinese government have to keep insisting that Tibet is part of China? So after he finished his job as a professor, economics professor then he embarked on this research. And his approach is completely different from Michael's. He looked at only Chinese imperial historical records, from the Yuan to the Mings and the Manchus, if you can consider the Mongols and Manchus also as Chinese. And he categorically proves that whether it's the Yuan dynasty or the Ming dynasty or the Qing dynasty, imperial China has never considered Tibet as part of China. So with these two books, now we explain to governments that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then you're going against international law, because we have only one agreement with People's Republic of China, that is the 17-point agreement. Even this agreement was forced upon us under duress, under the threat of war, preceded by the physical occupation of Chamdo in 1950, October 1950, and this agreement was forced upon us in May 1951. So under international law, these agreements are not valid anymore, because it's one-sided. It's an unequal agreement. It was forced upon the weaker group. That is one reason we keep telling the international community that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then you are going against international law. And if international law has to be implemented, why should Tibet be an exception there? It has to be applied to everyone. The second point that we make is, on the one hand, countries say at the behest of the Chinese government that Tibet is part of PRC. On the other hand, they also say we support negotiation between the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. And we tell these governments these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and the whole international community keeps repeating the statement that China wanted them to repeat. And then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? You're removing the very reason for negotiation. So it does not help us in any way. And the third thing that we mention is, do you have any cases around this world where you invade another country and ask the whole international community to say that this is part of us? Even within China, you don't have cases where Chinese government say this is part of China or that is part of China. Why only Tibet? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule over Tibet. And that is why they are trying to seek this legitimacy from the international community. Now, my question to the international community is, how many people have read Tibet's history? We lived on that plateau for centuries. And even then, when we remained isolated from the world around us decided for us. Now, when we are in exile, also the world around us is deciding for us. Who is the international community to decide for us? What right has politicians and people at the helm of affairs to change history? History cannot be changed on the whims and fancies of individuals and governments. It has to be based on facts. So that is why we have taken this approach. And we believe that this message is sinking to the Chinese government. And the second message definitely is to the international community, and that is why we keep explaining about the historical status of Tibet to the international community. And the third reason is for our own people, the Tibetan people. Now, how many Tibetan people read Tibetan history? How many understand Tibetan history? If Tibetans don't read Tibetan history, no one else will. People have too many things to while away their time in this modern age. So therefore, I urge every single Tibetan to look at their own history, study their own history, and be in a position to be able to debate with others on historical status of Tibet. So just speaking about this is not enough. We also have to bring support for the cause of Tibet through these efforts. And the fourth reason is we have independence advocates and middle way advocates within the Tibetan community. So none of us are seeking independence from each other, from each province to another. We are seeking independence from China, the independence advocates. If they are seeking independence, they are seeking independence from China. So why fight amongst ourselves? Whether you are a proponent of independence or whether you are a proponent of middle way approach, aim everything at Chinese government. There is no necessity to fight amongst ourselves to reduce our own strength. And we are only 130,000 Tibetans in exile. So if we remain disparate in many ways, then our strength will be weakened. And that's exactly what the Chinese government wants. So despite your position, with this approach of the 16th cabinet, we believe that even advocates of different positions can come together and work, because the common cause of the immediate situation inside Tibet is the same, even though it may differ in the longer term. But then we also have to learn to be pragmatic and see how Tibet can be resolved, how the Sino-Tibet conflict can be resolved, and how Tibetan people can be saved, how our culture can be saved, how our religion can be saved, and language can be saved. So that is why it's not enough just to talk about these things. So in the last 1 year, we have managed to convince our friends in the United States Congress to organize an expert's testimony on the historical status of Tibet, which we did on June 23rd last year. And based on that document, a bill has also been moved in both the Senate and the House in the United States government that specifies on how to counter China's false narrative on Tibet's history, and to recognize Tibet as an unresolved conflict. And I believe this will give strength to our fight for freedom. Then the second part was the upgradation of the information management system. So information gathering has become much more difficult because there are less number of people coming from Tibet since 2008. So in 2020, we had only 5 people from Tibet. In 2021, only 10 people. 2022, only 4 people. 2023, as we speak, only about a dozen people have managed to come from inside Tibet. So that also affects our communication. The other reasons why is also because of the border war, India-China border war. WeChat has been banned in India because of the trade war between US and China. WeChat has been banned. That is the only application the Tibetans inside Tibet can use, because China has banned Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, all other social media apps to be used inside China and in Tibet. So these also affects our communication. But despite all these difficulties, we are not just sitting idle. We are resorting to all kind of conventional means and also modern means of information gathering. And this activity is very, very important. We have to understand the reality of the situation inside Tibet and inform the international community accordingly. Otherwise, we would also be considered as lying to the international community, just as the Chinese have been doing all the time. There is no difference. So any information that the Central Tibetan administration comes out with has to be based on facts and on the ground information. So to prepare this, make good this information management system, the information that comes from Tibet and in China through open sources and through various other sources needs to be managed. And before we analyze all the incoming news every day or every week, it's important for the Tibet Policy Institute to prepare good presentations or research papers on the past activities or policies and programs of the Chinese government on different aspects of Tibetan life, whether it's to do with language, culture, religion, way of life, ecology or environment, or any other matters that concerns the plight of the Tibetans. We have to study the historical background and its impacts, change in policies and consequences. So those, if you research well once, and that could be an established presentation, and the everyday news that comes out of Tibet can be an addition or could be an evidence for the ask that we are requesting governments to take up. So once that is done, then the Department of Information and International Relations should be in a good position to disseminate all the information through the channels that we already have, through the offices of Tibet, through the Tibet support groups, through the VTAC members, and through the parliamentary groups for Tibet. And to do that, we have to strengthen the network of information dissemination system, and that is being developed by the Department of Information and International Relations. So these two areas are the key areas when it comes to resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict. One is reopening the Sino-Tibet dialogue. Under that comes the restructuring of the committee, reaching out to the Chinese government for resumption of dialogue, and then international advocacy for recognition of Tibet's historical status to gain appraisal for the middle way policy. And then the second part of this section is the upgradation of information management system and fine-tuning the information dissemination program. So under this, of course, there are programs for Tibetans, which includes the voluntary Tibet advocacy group. The 16th cabinet has come out with this platform for every single Tibetan to come on a common platform to work on the cause of Tibet. So in future, nobody can tell us that there was no platform. I wanted to do something, but there was no platform for me to do anything. The platform is very much there. Now, how much you want to take part in that or not is your decision. So as a Tibetan, and facing the kind of challenges that we are facing, getting the community, compact communities getting dispersed, and then Tibetans being relocated to different countries around the world, is definitely quite a challenge. But the opportunity is also, because of the dispersed Tibetan population, and these Tibetan population also having adopted citizenship of other countries, have the right to vote and also the right to request their representatives to represent their case. So this opportunity cannot be missed. And it is a very important platform that we have created, which we intend to nurture. There will be many more youth forum meetings, regional meetings, international meetings, where you'll be taking part and take the lead in the resolution of the Sino-Tibet conflict in the future, if it is not resolved during our lifetime or our time. This is the second part.